Is the current strategy in the Middle East actually realism? Or is it a dangerous gamble dressed in tough rhetoric? In this explosive hearing, the administration's war strategy is torn apart. From fabricated deals to the alienation of our closest allies, the mask of competence is slipping. You need to watch this full breakdown to understand the true cost of going it alone. Smith's first major blame targets the misuse of the term realism. He argues that starting a full-scale war with Iran to reshape the Middle East is the antithesis of a realistic strategy. Realism recognizes that wars often spiral out of control, leading to costs that far outweigh any perceived benefits. With 13 service members dead, thousands of civilians killed, and global gas prices skyrocketing, the administration's actions have ignored the fiscal and human reality. Calling this chaos realism is absurd when the strategy itself is fueling the very instability and debt that experts call our greatest national security threat. Watch out exactly what he said.
It has been put before us. I looked through the Secretary's remarks, and I've heard you give speeches before about this, about how realism is our strategy. And I find that absurd, and given what we are doing. You can say a lot of things about the strategy, but calling it realistic? We started a full-scale war in the Middle East against Iran to try to reshape the Middle East. Now, we can talk about that in a bunch of different ways, but it is the exact opposite of realism. And in fact, starting wars in the Middle East that get out of control and lead us to have far greater costs than benefits is one of the cornerstones of the unrealistic strategy that this administration has criticized over and over and over again. And yet here we are in a full-scale Mideast war, and we've seen the costs of that. Certainly at the top of that list is 13 service members killed and hundreds wounded, but it goes way beyond that thousands of civilians have been killed. Over a dozen countries now have been dragged into this war in one way or another. The Israel-Lebanon war has exploded since this war started. We now have a conflict between the Shia militias in Iraq and Kurdistan that is straining, to put it mildly, our relationship with Iraq, and also causing greater chaos throughout the Middle East. We've seen the impact on the economy. Certainly here at home, gas prices up by over $1. The impact of the fertilizer increase is going to come later as food prices skyrocket. But what is happening to us is a small part of what's happening to the rest of the world. Certainly the Middle East's economy has been tossed up in the air, but dozens of countries are rationing gasoline as we speak and experiencing extreme economic pain because of this.
The second critical question focuses on the lack of a strategic plan for Iran. Smith highlights the gap between tactical victories and strategic success. While the military successfully strikes targets, Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missile capabilities remain untouched. He blames the president for relying on wish fulfillment rather than reality, specifically citing the administration's false claims that Iran had agreed to a comprehensive deal. In reality, Iran hadn't even agreed to a meeting. Smith asks, how do tactical strikes translate into lasting change if the administration is literally making up diplomatic breakthroughs that don't exist? Watch out.
What we need to get answered today is, where is this going? What is the plan to achieve our objectives? We've seen the cost, and the cost is very, very high. All we keep hearing on the objectives is we keep seeing all of the targets that we have struck. And again, that is an incredible accomplishment from a tactical standpoint. I think the proficiency of our military has been on display, but we're not in this for a tactical advantage. We're in this to fundamentally change Iran. And as we sit here today, Iran's nuclear program is exactly what it was before this war started. They have not lost their capacity to inflict pain. They still have a ballistic missile program. They're still able to blockade the Strait of Hormuz and have the ships that are capable of doing that. What is the plan to get that to change? And most disturbingly, the president keeps telling us that it's over. What was it, a week ago Friday, the president announced that Iran had agreed to give up their nuclear program, to give up their ballistic missile program, to stop support for terrorist groups, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The only problem with that is literally none of that was true. He was completely making it up. It wasn't. Iran hadn't even agreed to meet with us. as became embarrassingly clear as the day spun out and poor J.D. Vance had to keep going back and forth to the airport. We never even had a meeting. So wish fulfillment is not really a strategy. I mean, maybe the president thinks he's doing some sort of Jedi mind trick and can tell Iran, you will give up your nuclear weapons, and they automatically will, but that's not working. So what we need to hear today is what is going to work. We have 50,000 troops in the region who are still at risk. How are those tactical victories going to translate into some sort of strategic success?
A third major blame is the administration's systematic alienation of global allies. Smith slams the strategy of going it alone while simultaneously insulting leaders like President Macron. He reminds the committee that NATO is a defensive alliance, not a blank check for unilateral wars. By belittling allies and disregarding their interests, the U.S. is losing the coalition needed to manage threats like the Houthis or the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Smith argues that trying to be the better bully rather than a leader of a rules-based order undercuts our global credibility and leaves us dangerously isolated. Watch it.
We're doing all of this on our own as we increasingly push away all of our allies. Sometimes just because we want to do what we want to do, we don't want to have to consult them. Sometimes just gratuitously insulting them. I mean, in the middle of this war where we were asking NATO to come join us, the president took time out to insult President Macron and his wife. Okay, how is that helping us to try and belittle everybody in the world? And I also, for the people who are criticizing NATO over this war, I will remind people that NATO is a defensive alliance. What that means is every country in it pledges to defend a country if attacked. And when we were attacked on 9/11, that's what NATO did. They put in Article 5, and for 20 years they fought beside us. NATO is not if any one of the countries decides to unilaterally and unwisely start a war precipitously that everyone else is supposed to join. That's not the way it works. So berating and belittling our allies after we did that and driving them ever further away from us, how is that realistic? Not only are we going to try to reshape the Middle East, but we're going to do it alone.
Finally, Smith questions the abandonment of American values and diplomatic tools. He blames the administration for gutting the State Department and USAID in favor of to real estate guys who have yielded zero results. This shift has led to the starvation of children and a total disregard for civilian casualties, such as the silence following the strike on a girls' school. By belittling a sovereign democracy like Ukraine while rolling out the red carpet. For dictators like Putin, Smith argues the U.S. is betraying the very moral authority that once made the world trust our leadership. Watch what he said.
You see that those numbers on the budget, but the State Department is really important. Development is really important. These are ways to achieve our ends, and we have moved away from that. We've gotten rid of the entire USAID, literally causing the starvation of children in countries where we had pledged to provide food, causing massive healthcare disruptions, people literally dying because we've cut that off. In diplomacy, we have sidelined again the entire world. France and the UK have brought together 44 different countries that have an interest in trying to open up the Strait of Hormuz. We've pushed them all aside. And then we've even pushed aside our own diplomatic corps. We have a very, very talented State Department. I praise today the talent of our military, and I will stand by that. They deserve that praise. Our diplomatic corps deserves that praise too. But we've shoved them all to the side in favor of two real estate guys who are going to go negotiate all the deals in the world, which to date, by the way, has yielded exactly nothing. So there's nothing realistic about starting a war in the Middle East, going it alone, and pushing aside all diplomacy and all development and all other tools in our arsenal. And on top of that, of course, we also want to dominate the entire Western Hemisphere, including apparently annexing Canada and invading Greenland. How is any of that realistic? And then the administration comes before us and asks for what is a hopelessly unrealistic budget in this environment. Back on that chart there, when we were showing how much money we were spending on defense, we had a balanced budget. We had a surplus many years. We don't have that anymore. So call this strategy whatever you want to call it, but please don't call it realism. It's not. forgive me, it reminds me of one of my favorite lines from The Princess Bride. It's a tense morning. I want to lighten it up a little bit. But the guy keeps saying, inconceivable, when things happen. And finally the guy says to him, you keep using that word. I don't think you know what it means. I don't think we know what the word realism means. So please, can we not have the realism conversation? Let's have the conversation about what the strategy actually is. And I'm sure you have a different definition of it than I do. But as I look at it, the strategy seems to be to use as much violence, as much threats, as much coercion as possible to bend the world to our will. I think that is a very dangerous strategy, because one of the oldest cliches in the military is the enemy gets a vote. And we may think that we can stand up and talk tough and talk about how strong we are and how we're burying our enemies and they're begging for a deal. We can do that all day long, all right? But the enemy gets a vote. They don't have to do what we tell them to do. And meanwhile, that coercive, violent strategy undermines our credibility in the world, because the chairman is absolutely right. And this is one area where I strongly disagree with the folks on the far left. They say that we don't really face any threats, that the U.S. is a malign influence in the world and always has been. I don't agree with that. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, variety of other transnational terrorist groups, including, yes, narco-terrorists and human traffickers over here. They all are trying to weaken us, all right? They don't want a rules-based order. They want to play by their own rules. They want to push us aside. We want to be the side that stands up for the rules. But if what we're saying to the rest of the world is stick with us because we're a better bully than China, we coerce countries more effectively, that undercuts the very message we're trying to spread to build the coalition we need to be successful. I also worry about the values that we're showing the world. When the president threatens to kill off an entire civilization, that is the message coming out of the United States of America. If we are going to be this big, powerful force that throws our weight around the world wants to know at a minimum that we're doing it for the right reasons and with a sense of values to protect people, not to destroy entire civilizations. And we all hear that and we all go, well, gosh, he probably doesn't mean it. Well, that is so reassuring, okay, that he's just making it up. We're supposed to be the United States of America. I grew up on stories of the U.S. at the end of World War II being the country that the Germans wanted to surrender to, not the Russians, because they knew they could trust our values. We don't seem to care about those values. No rules of engagement. Give them no quarter. All right? That is not who we are supposed to be. And just one final point on that. The girls' school that got hit in the first days of this war, there is absolutely no question at this point what happened. We made a mistake, and that happens in war. We identified this target based on earlier charts, and yet 2 months after it happened, we refused to say anything about it, giving the world the impression that we just don't care. We do not care about the casualties and the chaos that is caused by our war, and we should care, even if we want to prosecute that war. Now, I agree with the chairman. We need a strategy. We face the most complex threat environment that we've faced in a very, very long time. So we really want to hear from the administration. Don't give us this realism, chest-thumping stuff. What are we really going to do to meet the
We are witnessing a shift from principled leadership to coercive violence. That may leave us standing entirely alone. Are we still the nation the world looks to for stability? Or have we become just another bully? Is global dominance worth the price of our soul? Tell us your view below and follow Geopolitical Archive.